In 1870, a woman named Caroline Ingalls made a choice that would reshape her entire life. She packed what she could carry and moved her family into the Kansas wilderness, into a land where the nearest neighbor was a half-mile away and the nearest doctor was 3 days' ride. What she didn't know that first morning was that her body was about to face a series of demands so extreme that modern medicine would classify them as emergency conditions. One woman's choice to build a life on the frontier becomes a window into what the American frontier actually cost women, not as statistics, but as a physical reality happening inside their bodies minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. This is not the sanitized version of frontier life. This is what 24 hours on the American frontier actually did to a woman's body, and why so many pioneer women never made it past their first decade of settlement. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The day begins before dawn for a frontier woman like Caroline. For in the morning, the sky's still black, and she wakes in a sod house, a structure built from stacked earth and grass. The walls are cold, damp, perpetually weeping moisture. The roof leaks when it rains, and the floor is hard-packed dirt covered with whatever fabric she could spare. The mattress she's sleeping on is straw, and that straw is a civilization unto itself. Lice live in that straw. Fleas live in that straw. Bed bugs are having dinner in that straw, while Caroline's body rebuilds itself through the few hours of sleep she managed before the animals needed her. Her body temperature rises as she moves toward consciousness. Her core drops another degree from the cold seeping through the walls. Frontier pioneers called this the gray time, neither night nor day, just a transition moment before the work begins. Caroline has not slept well. She never sleeps well anymore. Her nervous system is in a state that would be diagnosed today as hypervigilance, a survival response to the constant background threat of the frontier. Her heart rate climbs just from waking. Cortisol floods her bloodstream because her body knows what comes next. 12 to 16 hours of labor beginning immediately. Her adrenal glands have been running at elevated output since she arrived on the plains 6 months ago. She rises from the straw mattress and her hands are cold, her joints stiff from the damp. She is 34 years old, and her body already carries the wear patterns of someone in her late 60s. The manual labor of frontier life does not care about your age or your plans. It takes everything. She pulls her dress on in the dark. The dress is the only one she has besides the one she's washing. She has one pair of shoes, and they do not fit properly anymore because her feet have swollen. Pregnancy, malnutrition, and constant standing have transformed her feet into something barely recognizable. The soles of her shoes are thin and her feet are cracked from the dust that coats everything. Before she leaves the cabin, Caroline places her hand on her stomach. She is pregnant, 2 months along, though she has not told her husband yet, hoping the hard physical work might prevent it. She has given birth 4 times in 5 years. The last child, Grace, was born with complications. She knows what pregnancy means on the frontier. It means continuing the same 16-hour workday while her body divides its resources between survival and reproduction. It means she cannot afford to be weak. It means her body will break before she will. Caroline builds the fire from buffalo chips because trees do not grow on the Kansas prairie. Buffalo chips are dried manure, and the work of burning them produces minimal heat and maximum smoke that seeps into her eyes and lungs. She will not have a day in the next 60 years when her lungs are not inflamed from this smoke. She is breathing in particulate matter constantly, and her body is mounting an immune response that never fully resolves. The smoke irritates her airways and triggers coughing that becomes so chronic that visitors will later remark on how she seems perpetually ill, though she insists she is fine. Breakfast is cornmeal mush and salt pork, the same meal she had yesterday and the day before and will have tomorrow. The cornmeal was dried in the fall and is now winter, and the kernels have begun to sprout in storage, a sign of developing mold. She boils it anyway because it is what she has. The salt pork is preserved in salt so heavily that Caroline must soak it to make it edible. The combination provides approximately 400 calories and enough sodium to elevate her blood pressure. The protein from the pork is valuable, but the preparation methods of the frontier strip nutrients from it. She needs niacin from food sources, and corn without proper preparation does not provide it. What she is eating is systematically destroying her from the inside. Pellagra, a disease triggered by niacin deficiency, killed over 100,000 Americans by the 1930s, and the cause was this exact meal. Corn and salt pork, day after day, year after year, progressively depleting a woman's ability to synthesize the nutrient her body desperately needs. The disease manifests as dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and death. The 4DS. But Caroline does not know this. Nobody knows this yet. She only knows that she is tired and her skin is beginning to break out in areas that seem to follow where the sun burns her. She thinks it is sun damage. She cannot afford to be wrong for very long. She eats standing up. Her feet are swelling already, and they will only swell more as the day progresses. She drinks water from the well, and this water has been a source of disease on the frontier. Cholera has already killed millions of overland immigrants. The wells on the frontier sit yards away from outhouses, and the waste seeps directly into the groundwater. Typhoid fever, dysentery, and cholera all travel in this water. Caroline has no way of knowing which day she might drink a cup that contains the bacteria that will end her life or her family's lives. The probability is not small. It is built into every day. She calculates the risk unconsciously. There is no alternative source of water. She drinks it. Her immune system tenses. Her white blood cells stand ready for an invasion that might come or might not come. Living in a constant state of immune alert is exhausting for the body. The sun rises and Caroline moves into the work that defines frontier existence. She tends the garden, small though it is, because vegetables are the difference between having some nutrition and having none. She milks the cow if her family was fortunate enough to afford one. She hauls water in buckets from the well, carrying 60 pounds in 2 trips. Her arms are thin, but they are strong. The constant repetitive motion has altered her skeleton. The stress markers on her bones accumulate from work that modern occupational safety standards would classify as dangerous. She carries water, and each trip is 200 yards from the house to the well. By hour 3 of this work, her heart rate is elevated continuously. Her body is burning calories, far more than the meager 400 she consumed at breakfast. A frontier woman burns approximately 3,500 calories per day from the physical labor of homesteading. Hauling water, tending garden, mending clothes, processing food, cleaning, and all the invisible work of keeping a family alive. Her caloric intake is nowhere near this amount. She is running a severe nutritional deficit. Her metabolism is in crisis mode, automatically downshifting to preserve function. Her body is cannibalizing its own muscle tissue to fuel the work. She is literally consuming herself. Frontier-era skeletons show consistent markers of malnutrition, stress fractures, and degenerative joint disease in women as young as 25 years old. Caroline feels this happening. She feels weaker than she should be. She assumes it is simply the way women are, weak by nature. She does not know that the weakness is starvation. Her hands develop blisters as she works. The blisters are the body's first line of response to injury. When blisters rupture, which they inevitably do in the middle of frontier work, the exposed tissue becomes a wound site vulnerable to infection. Infection on the frontier is a death sentence because antibiotics do not exist. She wraps her hands with cloth torn from garments she cannot afford to lose, and she continues working. The pain signal from her hands reaches her brain, but she has learned to ignore it. The body has an amazing capacity to suppress pain when survival depends on continuing the motion causing it. This suppression is not healthy. Her nervous system is developing patterns of ignoring signals that matter. The inflammation in her hands becomes chronic, and this chronic inflammation is beginning a cascade toward arthritis that will cripple her by the time she reaches her 60s. By midday, the sun is punishing. Kansas in summer reaches 95 to 100 degrees regularly, and the prairie offers no shade. Caroline's skin is exposed to ultraviolet radiation without protection. Sunscreen will not exist for decades. Her remedy is to wear long sleeves and a bonnet, trapping more heat against her body. Her core temperature is rising. Sweat production increases as her body attempts to cool itself, but she cannot afford to rest and drink water freely. Water might run out before evening. She rations it. She is already experiencing the early signs of dehydration by early afternoon, a condition that develops before the sensation of thirst appears. Her mucous membranes are drying. Her blood is becoming more viscous. Her kidneys are beginning to concentrate urine in response to decreased fluid intake. The dust of the prairie is everywhere. Grasshopper plagues coat the ground 6 to 12 inches deep in certain years, turning day into darkness. The dust and the insects are inhaled with every breath. Caroline's lungs are processing millions of dust particles daily. Her lung tissue is developing scarring, a process so slow and invisible that she will not realize until later in life that her lungs have lost capacity. Miners on the frontier showed silicosis rates of 46% within 2 years of employment. Caroline is not a miner, but she is breathing dust from morning until nightfall. Her lungs are being slowly destroyed, and there is no medical intervention available. The scarring will reduce her ability to absorb oxygen for the rest of her life. She will become breathless more easily as she ages. She will attribute it to aging. It is actually damage accumulating from this dust, from this single day and thousands like it. By noon, her hands are bleeding from the blisters that opened during morning work. She washes them in the water she has carried from the well. Bacteria from her hands mixes with the water. She does not see the connection between this water and the illnesses that have periodically struck her family. Nobody understands germ theory yet. The most advanced medical understanding available to her is the theory of miasma, the belief that disease travels through bad air. She therefore believes that if she simply avoids breathing in the wrong air, she will be safe. The actual bacteria are invisible. The actual connection between her unwashed hands and illness is unknown. She will not live to see the discovery of germ theory. The knowledge that would save her life will arrive after she is already dead. Caroline has been working for 8 hours. Her caloric deficit is now significant. Her blood glucose is dropping. Her body is signaling alarm. A wave of dizziness passes through her. She sits down for a moment on the porch, and a sharp pain moves across her lower abdomen. This is the pregnancy. Her uterus is expanding, putting pressure on nerves and blood vessels. The pain arrives without warning and passes without resolution. She breathes through it. She has been pregnant 4 times before. She knows the pain is part of the process. What she does not know is that her body is barely managing the demands of pregnancy while sustaining the physical labor of homesteading. She is putting herself and her developing child at risk. The medical knowledge to understand this does not yet exist. There are no prenatal vitamins. There is no understanding of nutrition's role in fetal development. There is only tradition. Women have always worked through pregnancy. She will work through it too. Horseflies attack her while she is in the field. The bites are painful, and the insects leave welts that will itch for hours. She swats at them, but they return. Mosquitoes emerge at dusk, and the two together will become relentless. By evening, she will have dozens of new insect bites adding to the ones from yesterday and the days before. The constant itching is a low-level stress on her nervous system. She is not sleeping well partially because of the insects. She scratches in her sleep, and the scratching introduces infection into the bites. Several of the bites will become infected. One small sore on her ankle has been scratched so much that it has developed into a small ulcer. If this wound becomes seriously infected, it could lead to blood poisoning. The frontier offered no antibiotics and no emergency room. An infected wound could be fatal. Caroline takes a short break and sits with her other children. Mary is 6, Laura is 4, and Carrie is 2. Each of these children is a piece of Caroline's life force. She has hemorrhaged after giving birth to all of them. She has recovered from infections. She has watched them fight illnesses without medicine, surviving or not through luck and the resilience of their small bodies. Mary is showing signs of the eye condition that will eventually blind her. Caroline notices the inflammation, the difficulty focusing, and she knows what it means. Her daughter will lose her sight. There is nothing she can do. Medical care is simply not available. She holds Mary and feels the weight of her guilt for having brought her into this world, into these conditions. Pregnancy has killed frontier women at rates 3 times higher than in the settled East. A woman who gave birth to 8 children faced a lifetime risk of dying in childbirth of 1 in 8. The causes were infection, hemorrhage, and complications that modern obstetrics could manage easily, but which in 1870 were essentially death sentences. Caroline knows this. She has lived long enough to know women who have died from childbirth, who have left husbands and children behind. She is pregnant. The mathematics of this fact are sitting in her conscious mind constantly. The chances that this pregnancy will kill her are not small. The chances that this pregnancy will kill her unborn child are not small. The chances that the birth itself will damage her body in ways that will affect her for the rest of her life are very high. This knowledge is a weight she carries in every moment. Her anxiety levels are elevated because the danger is real. Her body produces stress hormones in response to this very rational fear. Caroline has been working for 14 hours. Her caloric deficit is now around 2,500 calories. She is functioning on emergency reserves. Her liver is releasing glucose stored as glycogen, a finite resource that she is burning through rapidly. Her muscles are being broken down to provide amino acids for fuel. She is quite literally wasting away during this single day, and thousands like it. She drinks from the well again, more water this time because her body is demanding it. Thirst is a late indicator of dehydration, and she has already crossed the threshold into dehydration. The water she drinks might contain cholera bacteria. She has no way of knowing. The bacteria are invisible. They will colonize her small intestine if they are present. Within 12 hours, she might begin to feel sick. Within 24 hours, she might be dying. Cholera kills by causing devastating diarrhea and vomiting, leading to fluid losses of 1 liter per hour. A person can die of dehydration from cholera in a matter of hours. Women on the Oregon Trail died of this disease at rates that made the trails a literal graveyard. One letter from Martha Fellue, written June of 1852, catalogs the horror of cholera on the trail. She lists her relatives one by one. Frances died June 4th. Maria died June 6th. Polly died the 9th. Lafayette died the 10th. Elizabeth and her baby died on the 11th and 17th. 7 family members in 2 weeks, all from the water. The letter is not dramatic. It is simple, factual, just names and dates, and the realization that an entire family has been erased from the world in 14 days. Caroline knows this happened. Word of cholera epidemics travels even to isolated frontier homesteads. She knows that drinking water is a form of Russian roulette. She drinks it anyway because she has to. The risk is accepted as a condition of living. She continues her work. The sun is dropping toward the horizon, and Caroline's body is in a state of crisis that she is too busy to acknowledge. Her caloric deficit is massive. Her core temperature has been elevated all day. Her nervous system has been running in overdrive. Her muscles are damaged from repetitive motion. Her hands are infected. Her pregnancy is adding a second metabolic demand that her body cannot meet. Her immune system has spent the day fighting every potential infection simultaneously. And now, with perhaps 2 hours of daylight remaining, she must begin the evening work. She prepares supper. This means starting a fire, bringing water to a boil, and preparing the same meal her family will eat every night: beans and hardtack or cornmeal mush and salt pork. The work is repetitive and familiar, but her body is running on fumes. Her decision-making capacity has declined from exhaustion. Her patience is thin. Small frustrations that would be minor on a normal day feel overwhelming. Her children's needs seem endless, and her capacity to meet them feels impossible. This is what frontier exhaustion looked like. It was not romantic. It was not noble. It was simply the grinding depletion of a human body being asked to do more than it can sustain. Supper is eaten quickly, standing or sitting on makeshift furniture. The children are put to bed in the dark. They sleep on straw pallets, and within moments they are unconscious, the way children sleep when they have burned every calorie their bodies can produce. Caroline cleans the single pot used for cooking, using water she has heated. She scrubs it with sand because soap is precious and made only occasionally from rendered fat. Her hands are raw from constant immersion in water and the alkaline solution used for cleaning. The skin is beginning to crack. She wraps them loosely with cloth. Every moment of this evening work is happening while her body is begging for rest. By evening, Caroline's body is producing stress hormones at levels that would be considered medical crisis in modern context. Her cortisol levels are chronically elevated. Her adrenaline is running low. She is in the condition that frontier journals described as prairie madness, a term for the psychological breakdown that happened to women isolated on the plains. The Nebraska Asylum for the Insane tracked the progression of this condition. Admissions jumped from 87 in 1871 to 545 in 1885 as more women moved onto the frontier. The condition was not weakness. It was a natural response to isolation, constant danger, and the physical exhaustion of frontier life. Caroline's next-door neighbor is a half-mile away. She cannot walk there without her children because the frontier holds dangers. She has not spoken to another woman in 2 weeks. The last woman she spoke to was at a community quilting bee, and that was 3 weeks before that. Her human contact is limited to her husband and her children, and her husband is often gone. He has taken work in a town 2 days ride away to earn money for the homestead. He returns every few weeks. She is alone with 4 children in a sod house on an endless prairie. The isolation is not a feature of frontier life that she can separate from. It is the defining characteristic. She is alone, and this aloneness is beginning to change her mind. She sits by the fire as darkness falls, and she feels the weight of her life. She is 34 years old, and she has aged 20 years. Her body shows all the wear marks of someone much older. Her hands are constantly in pain. Her feet are swollen. Her back aches constantly from carrying water and bending to garden work. She has chronic headaches from the dust and the smoke and the constant tension. She is perpetually ill with minor infections and digestive complaints. She is pregnant and afraid. She is alone. She is exhausted. And she has at least 20 years ahead of her of exactly this life, this work, this isolation. The realization sits on her like a weight. Some frontier women broke at this point. Some walked away. Some took their own lives. Some simply developed a kind of numbness, a disconnection from their own experience that allowed them to continue functioning, but also never really feeling again. Caroline is one of the ones who continues. She sits by the fire, and she feels the crushing weight of her circumstances, and then she gets up and she prepares for bed. She washes herself quickly in cold water from a basin. Bathing on the frontier is rare. Water must be hauled and heated, and most families bathe perhaps once a month. She is thin and muscular from constant labor, but also beginning to show the physical signs of age that have no business appearing on a 34-year-old woman. Her spine is beginning to curve forward from the constant bending. Her ribs are becoming prominent as her body metabolizes its own muscle for fuel. She looks in a small mirror and does not recognize herself. She is becoming a stranger to her own reflection. She climbs into the straw mattress beside her husband, who is home this week. The mattress is infested with lice, and she will likely have them in her hair and on her body by morning. She will spend hours each week trying to comb them out, a task that is essentially futile, but that she performs anyway, because lice are the one thing on the frontier that she can feel some control over. She lies in the dark, listening to the wind outside the sod house, and she cannot sleep. Her body is in a state that sleep researchers would call hyperarousal. She is physically exhausted, but her nervous system is too activated to allow sleep. She lies awake for hours, her mind racing through lists of work undone, problems unsolved, dangers avoided, and dangers waiting. By midnight, she has had perhaps 15 minutes of sleep, and that sleep was interrupted by the baby crying, requiring her to rise and tend to a diaper situation that involves no running water and minimal cloth to clean with. She returns to bed and tries again. Sleep will not come. She is exhausted and awake simultaneously, a state that is particularly cruel because the body desperately needs sleep, but the mind will not allow it. This pattern has been happening every night for weeks. She is chronically sleep-deprived, which is degrading her immune function further, increasing her inflammation, and beginning to affect her cognitive abilities. Sleep deprivation in the long term leads to weight gain even though she is losing weight, mood disturbance, increased risk of infection, and accelerated aging. She is aging faster because she is sleeping less than 6 hours per night on a consistent basis. Her skin shows premature wrinkles. Her eyes have dark circles that no amount of rest seems to remedy because she is never getting real rest. The sun rises again and Caroline is still awake. She got perhaps 2 hours of sleep in the previous 24 hours. She has not eaten since the cornmeal mush at dawn yesterday. She is running on the stored glycogen in her liver, which she has already significantly depleted. Her blood glucose is low. Her brain is struggling to function properly on inadequate fuel. She feels dizzy. She feels disoriented. Her hands shake. She is experiencing the early symptoms of what would be classified as metabolic crisis in medical context. She rises because rising is what she does. She builds the fire. She prepares the cornmeal and the salt pork. She feeds her children. She prepares for the day's work. knowing that it will be exactly like yesterday's work, and the day before's work, and the day before that. This is the moment that needs to be understood. This is not romance. This is not adventure. This is not the noble pioneer spirit. This is what the frontier cost women. It cost them their health, their youth, their psychological stability, and often their lives. Women like Caroline did not simply endure the frontier. They were slowly destroyed by it, day after day, year after year, until their bodies gave out or their minds broke, or they simply lay down and did not get up. The first states to grant women the right to vote were the ones in the Pacific Northwest and Upper Midwest, the frontier states. This was not coincidence. Women had proven on the frontier that they were equal partners in building civilization. They had proven it through the destruction of their bodies. They had proven it through their survival of conditions that were medically catastrophic. And they had proven it through their refusal to disappear, even when disappearing seemed easier than continuing. Caroline's experience was not unique. It was shared by hundreds of thousands of women who moved onto the frontier in the 1800s. Some of them maintained records of their experience. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote about her life as a frontier child, and as an adult reader examines her childhood accounts, a darker picture emerges. Her mother, Caroline Ingalls, was the backbone of the family's survival, taking up the slack when her husband failed at business ventures, managing the household under conditions that modern safety standards would classify as impossible. She was described by Laura as having remarkable serenity in the face of endless hardship. This serenity was not contentment. It was resignation. It was a learned response to circumstances that could not be changed. The only way to survive was to stop fighting and start accepting. This is what the frontier taught women. Childbirth on the frontier killed women at staggering rates. Maternal mortality in the 1800s was approximately 500 to 1,000 deaths per 100,000 births, or one woman dying for every 100 to 200 babies born. For a woman who gave birth to 8 children, as was common on the frontier, the lifetime risk of dying from childbirth was extremely high. The causes were infection from unsterilized instruments and lack of hygiene, hemorrhage without access to blood transfusion or even basic medical care, and complications like eclampsia that could not be managed without modern obstetrics. Women died alone or with only family members present, no medical expertise available. Some women died, and their babies died with them. Some women died, and their babies survived, leaving the father with multiple children and no mother. The frontier was a graveyard for women. Cholera was the most terrifying. A person could feel well at breakfast and be dead by nightfall. The bacteria colonized the intestines and caused fluid losses so catastrophic that the body simply shut down. The skin would wrinkle and turn blue from the complete loss of fluid. There was no treatment. Rehydration was not understood as medical intervention. Frontier medical treatment meant bloodletting, which made things worse. Between 1849 and 1855, an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 overland immigrants died of cholera. Women died of it at the same rates as men, but they were less likely to be able to rest during recovery because the household work did not stop. A woman recovering from cholera while still tending children and managing a household had a lower survival rate than a man who could simply lie down until the illness passed. Tuberculosis infected approximately 1 in 7 Americans during the frontier era. It killed by slowly destroying lung tissue, causing people to literally waste away. Women with tuberculosis continued working because the work had to be done. A woman with tuberculosis would cough up blood into her handkerchief and then continue mending clothes or preparing food. The disease spread to her children. It spread to her husband. It destroyed entire family units from the inside. The only treatment available was rest, and rest was something frontier women could not afford. Dysentery and typhoid were constant threats from contaminated water. Both diseases caused severe diarrhea, dehydration, and often death. A frontier woman with dysentery was managing severe diarrhea while still responsible for the household and the children. She was contaminating water and food with her hands while sick, spreading the disease further. She was dehydrating while not having access to adequate clean water to recover. Many women died from dysentery while still believing it was simply a digestive complaint that would pass. Malaria plagued frontier forts and river settlements. It caused fever, chills, and in severe cases, death. The only treatment was quinine, which was so expensive that one Indiana doctor sold an entire herd of cattle to afford enough quinine for a single patient. A frontier woman with malaria continued working while fevered and chilled, managing a household in a state of delirium. If Caroline got sick and a doctor was available, which was unlikely, she would have been subjected to medical treatments that were often worse than the disease. Calomel, which is mercury chloride, was the most commonly prescribed drug. Doctors administered it until the patient's gums began to bleed and their teeth fell out. The mercury was poisoning them, but the doctors interpreted the drooling as a sign that the medicine was working. Bloodletting was the treatment for fever. A doctor would open a vein and let blood pour out until the patient was pale and weak. This seemed logical at the time because it was assumed that fever was caused by too much blood. The actual cause, infection, was never addressed. The bleeding made things worse. Surgery happened without anesthesia until the 1840s, when ether became available, and even then it was not widely used. Antiseptic surgery did not exist until the 1870s. An estimated 80% of surgeries resulted in infection before basic hand-washing between patients became standard. A frontier woman who needed surgery was likely to die from infection even if the surgery itself was successful. Childbirth was the surgery most likely to be attempted on frontier women, and childbirth complications often required surgical intervention. A woman hemorrhaging during childbirth might have been treated with mercury, which did nothing for the bleeding, or bloodletting, which made it worse. She would have had a higher likelihood of death with a doctor present than she would have had with a midwife who knew the traditional practices that actually helped. Chloroform was introduced as an anesthetic for childbirth in 1847, and Queen Victoria used it in 1853. But the frontier did not have access to chloroform. Frontier women in labor had whiskey if they were fortunate. Most had nothing. The pain of labor without pain medication is catastrophic. The body is in survival mode. Stress hormones are at maximum, and the muscle contractions necessary for delivery are uncontrolled and agonizing. A woman in labor could push for days if the baby was positioned wrong. She could rupture internally from the strain. She could die from the effort of trying to birth a child that her body was not physically capable of delivering. Midway through this 24-hour period, Caroline would have experienced a disaster that nobody records or counts: a miscarriage or a stillbirth. The frontier had no prenatal care, no understanding of what kept a pregnancy viable, and no ability to intervene if something went wrong. A woman could lose a baby silently, the body simply expelling what could not be carried under the conditions of frontier life. The grief was private. The recovery was physical, and it was incomplete. A woman who miscarried on the frontier was back to full work within days. She was not allowed time to grieve or to heal. The body was expected to recover as quickly as possible because work did not stop. Infections from wounds that should have been minor became amputations. A blister became a sore, became an infection, became gangrene, became amputation. A frontier woman with no hands or no feet could not work. A woman who could not work was a liability. Some women with amputations were abandoned. Some were cared for out of a sense of duty that was accompanied by deep resentment. The psychological weight of being disabled and dependent on a frontier family that could barely feed itself was crushing. But some women adapted. Some frontier women with one leg became teachers. Some with scarred faces became traders. Some simply learned to work around their disability because stopping was not an option. By the end of this single 24-hour period, Caroline's body has experienced the equivalent of an extreme athletic event combined with a significant illness. She has lost weight despite eating. She has depleted her nutrient stores. She has accumulated inflammation throughout her body. She has accumulated microtrauma in her joints and her muscle tissue. She has experienced stress hormone levels that normally only occur during life-threatening emergencies. Her nervous system has been activated in overdrive. Her sleep deprivation is adding up to a chronic state. Her pregnancy is continuing while her body is in deficit. And she will repeat this day tomorrow, and the day after, and for the next 40 or 50 years if she survives. Frontier-era skeletons are telling us the full story of what this life cost women. The bones show evidence of repeated infections. The spine shows early signs of degenerative disc disease from heavy lifting. The joints show stress markers typically seen in people twice their age. Women who died in their 50s show skeletal age indicators of people in their 80s. The frontier was not just killing women. It was aging them at an accelerated rate. It was destroying their bodies before their minds had to give out. The American frontier narrative focuses on the men. It focuses on the cowboys and the prospectors and the explorers. The women are the people who waited at home or who were brought along as wives. This narrative completely erases the fact that women were not accompanying men. Women were the ones doing the work that made the frontier sustainable. Women built the communities. Women ensured that settlers did not starve. Women raised the next generation under impossible conditions. Women died at rates that matched men, but whose deaths were often attributed to women's weakness rather than to the actual conditions. A frontier woman could own land after the Homestead Act of 1862. This was revolutionary. Women could inherit farms if their husbands died. They could manage property. They could make business decisions. This opportunity came because frontier life had proven that women could do every task that men could do and often could do it better, with more organization and more care for the long-term sustainability of the community. The first states to grant women the right to vote were frontier states, not because frontier men were enlightened. They voted to give women rights because women had earned those rights through the sheer force of their survival and their contribution. Caroline Ingalls lived to be 92 years old, which was exceptional. Most frontier women did not. She lived those 92 years with the accumulated damage of her frontier life. Her hands never completely healed. Her lungs never recovered from the smoke and dust. Her body never fully replenished the nutrients it had lost. She had 7 children, one of whom died as an infant. She experienced at least 2 miscarriages. She survived multiple diseases that killed others around her. She endured isolation that drove many women to suicide or institutionalization. And she did it because the alternative was not available. She could not go back to the East. She could not leave her children with no mother. She could not give up. This is what the frontier cost women, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a literal, physical, cellular sense. It cost them their health. It cost them their youth. It cost them their psychological stability. Some of them paid the ultimate price and died from these costs. Most of them survived, but at the expense of living the rest of their lives with compromised health and early aging. When you think about the American frontier, think about Caroline. Think about the fact that her body was the frontier being conquered. Think about the fact that her survival was built on a foundation of constant deficit, constant danger, and constant exhaustion. Think about the fact that she did this while pregnant, while tending children, while managing a household, while the world around her offered no support and no understanding of what she was enduring. The frontier did not just change America. It changed women. Women who were treated as property in the East became landowners in the West. Women who had no legal rights in the East became economic partners in the West. This transformation did not happen because men were generous. It happened because women survived conditions that would have destroyed anyone else. It happened because women proved through their actions that they were the equal of any man. It happened because women built civilization in places where there was nothing but empty land and danger. And then, after they had built that civilization, after they had proven their worth, they were written out of the narrative. The frontier stories became stories about men. The cowboy, the prospector, the explorer. The pioneer woman was reduced to a romantic figure in a sunbonnet, when the reality was something entirely different. The reality was a woman like Caroline, aging at twice the normal rate, her body constantly in deficit, her mind under siege from isolation, her hands bleeding from constant work, her pregnancy hanging over her like a threat. The reality was that she built something that lasted, and she did it at a cost that the history books never calculated. Every frontier homestead that thrived did so because of the woman at its center. Every frontier community that survived was built on women's labor and women's organization and women's refusal to give up even when giving up was the rational choice. And none of them were asked about the cost. None of them were thanked. None of them had their suffering acknowledged while they were still alive to hear it. They simply worked and endured and aged and died. And sometimes they saw their grandchildren, and sometimes they did not. Modern medicine has finally caught up to the frontier. We understand now what Caroline could not have known. We understand that her body was in constant crisis. We understand that her caloric deficit was a form of starvation. We understand that her sleep deprivation was causing damage that would accumulate over a lifetime. We understand that her pregnancy while malnourished and exhausted was putting both her life and her child's life at risk. We understand that the water she drank was likely containing disease. We understand that the dust she breathed was creating permanent scarring in her lungs. We understand that the isolation she experienced was pushing her towards psychological crisis. We understand the cost. And yet, we have largely forgotten. We look at frontier women as romantic figures, as brave adventurers, as pioneers with strength of character. And yes, they were brave. Yes, they were strong. But their strength did not come from some special character trait that frontier women possessed. It came from their refusal to choose death when continuing was the only option available. It came from their body's ability to adapt to impossible conditions. It came from their mind's capacity to survive psychological trauma that would crush most people. It came from their determination to keep their children alive even when their own survival was uncertain. When you imagine the American frontier now, imagine it through a woman's body. Imagine starting your day before dawn, exhausted from 5 hours of sleep interrupted by nightmares and insects. Imagine working for 16 hours straight while your body is running a caloric deficit of 2,500 calories. Imagine being pregnant and not knowing if you will survive the birth. Imagine being alone, miles from any other woman, with no one to talk to about your fears or your pain. Imagine continuing this day, and the next day, and the next day, for the rest of your life. Imagine that you do not have the option to stop. Imagine that you have children depending on you, and if you stop, they will not eat. Imagine that you understand, on a very fundamental level, that your body is being consumed by the work required to keep them alive. And then imagine that you continue anyway. This is what the American frontier cost women. This is the physical reality hidden beneath the romantic narrative. This is the body's true story, written in calcium depletion and spinal damage, in premature aging, and the slow accumulation of diseases that would eventually kill them. The bones tell the story that the women themselves could not tell because they were too busy surviving to have time to talk about it. They built a nation, and they did it at a cost that history has only begun to measure.